Janelle, can you hear me? Okay, can't hear you, but
There you go. You should hear me now.
oh yeah. Hi, Sumner.
Hello, Bob.
Hi.
Do you have no video? Or are you shy?
I didn't mean to turn my video off.
Lower right-hand corner.
Uh,
Should say start video.
Start
You
video.
know, I'm curious.
Okay, probably should see me now.
Yes, we see you.
Oh,
So where do you live in the city? Do you live over off of Kings Highway somewhere?
I live on Railroad Avenue.
Okay. Okay.
Do you know where Victor Lentnoff used to live?
No, I actually don't. But,
Near the old library.
Okay. So, in your background, are you an engineer?
Yeah,
What kind of engineer?
mechanical engineer.
Okay. Super. Well, I'm really glad that you've joined this committee.
So,
We need
well,
all.
before y'all start, could you bring me up to speed a little bit about what this meeting is about? And I've read the stuff that Tom sent me, and a little bit I mean, it seems like we need an ordinance by middle of the month, and we seem to be a long way from that. Is that, how do we get there?
Maybe I'll let you start. I may.
Sure. Oh, let me promote Tom real quick.
Okay, I was wondering if Tom was joining us.
Just showed up, so he's coming on now. So what we've done is we kind of took the sea level rise in a couple of different parts. We thought it would be easier, more manageable for the subcommittee to handle, and then potentially to get it approved. So what we did was look at critical facilities and redevelopment, and hopefully we'll be taking that to the commission for their consideration, and then move that forward to mayor and council. Well, then we continue to work on new development. So we kind of were biting it off in like little chunks to kind of, so we could get it moving forward. We called it resiliency because based on what the hazard mitigation team is doing and other things that other subcommittees are working on, it just made sense to be in a broader category as resiliency. So there's a lot of room for options to continue to add to the code section.
Tom, were you on the mitigation planning meeting?
Yes, it was.
So there was an interesting comment that Rob made. I think it was toward the end of the meeting about his sort of sense of the relationship between the mitigation planning efforts and Lewis Planning Commission. And I have to say, a lot of the conversation happened today, and every time I've gone to those mitigation planning meetings, at least when we could go in person, they tended to have more of an emergency management, emergency planning flavor. And the way that Danielle was just referring to resiliency, I think I mean, it relates to emergency planning, but it's a lot more than that. I mean, the way I guess I look at it is if we're doing our job in planning with resilience in mind, we will minimize the damage from some sort of an emergency. And if there is damage, we can bounce back as quick as possible. And it may be that a lot of that's going to fall on the shoulders of us and some of the other subcommittees in planning. That'll all get worked out tomorrow, right? We're going to get that all put together, and
that's why we're meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, that's my hope also out of it. Very much what Rob said is a division of responsibilities with what's going to be in mitigation. Clearly, hurricane response, disaster response, recovery efforts, Phragmites control, all of that is clearly in mitigation, but some of the more longer range planning aspects, hopefully, being assigned to planning commission so we can be more proactive rather than waiting for things to be remanded to us. And then if there's any aspects of it that go directly to BPW, such as, stormwater management design, those aspects. So, that's what I'm looking for out of tomorrow's meeting, is some more clear delineation.
Here's a sort of an interesting cross-cutting issue, but another cross-cutting issue. And anyway, there was a talk today on the mitigation planning committee about an update on the Phragmites control program and the need to sort of prevent fire issues related to the Phragmites that's sort of building behind a number of houses in parts of the city. In the process of doing sort of background research for this subcommittee of the Planning Commission, I've come across several different scientific articles that suggest that Phragmites very well may be our friend when it comes to allowing the marginal areas, maybe their wetland areas, to build up as the sea level rises so that they aren't overwhelmed by water. And I don't want to get into all that now, but I think that there's there's a balancing act that we may need to keep in mind rather than simply burn everything down for the sake of.
Yeah, I mean, we've had that discussion, and that Phragmites is a double-edged sword. Brent just chimed in on that as well, that they'll clean the nutrients and the roots hold fast, but
Right.
also an invasive species. So
Like I said, a balancing act.
Yeah, so let's get us on topic today. Sea level rise, we're working on looking at potential items. Let me bring that up real quick for me so I can get us on for best management practices.
Janelle, before you go forward, I don't know if Bob, did that answer your question?
No, but hum a few bars and I'll try to get you.
And always feel free to call me, and I'm happy to help. So again, we're looking at sea level rise. We've recognized an issue where we're located. The impacts of sea level rise will be occurring soon, and in some instances we've already noticed that. So how are we going to address it? So, and for all the people who are listening, you haven't been attending on a regular basis, we're breaking this up into a couple different parts. We've recognized that we want to do something about sea level rise, so we're calling it resiliency because we recognize sea level rise is a part of a much larger area discussion. We've looked at critical facilities, think of roads, hospitals, city hall, emergency management items, wastewater treatment plants, are all of our critical facilities, and having them built at a criteria to address sea level rise. And currently what we're looking at is redevelopment, when you need to redevelopment a commercial site or a residential site, and how would we want to address sea level rise with that. And then hopefully we'll be taking this forward to the commission and then getting that through to mayor and council for their consideration. And then we're going to continue to work on new development and what do we want to look for new development. All of this information is on the city's website under planning projects, under the sea level rise. The current draft of the resiliency draft is there. So if you want to, follow us along, you're more than welcome. So what we've been looking at most recently is for redevelopment, looking at lot coverage, and there's concerns that a lot of the areas that are impacted by sea level rise have a very high lot coverage. So do we want to reduce that lot coverage while also requiring some best management practices, some BMPs, to be implemented to allow us to, we recognize we've got flooding issues and other things going on with sea level rise. So how do we kind of counteract, the fact that A lot of the city wants to be near the water and recognize on that balance. So last time we were discussing the different categories for the best management practices, our BMPs for stormwater management and resiliency. I put together kind of just a kind of draft, kind of the guidelines, kind of go, okay, certain things maybe make more sense for commercial and large scale redevelopment. Some items are more for a single family residential. You know, if we're going to do a rain barrel, there needs to be a minimum size for that, you know, so we can kind of make sure we're hauling and covering, you know, the items that we need. So, let's
So,
go.
I think I'll start out with saying I think you did a good job of putting together a straw man for the design guidelines. But I think this is where we need to have the discussions today so we can be ready to forward something to mayor and city council. And Bob and Sumner, I don't know if you had a chance to look through the design guidelines.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I have. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I'm ready to sort of say, you know, yeah, this is perfect and ready to go forward. But I mean, like you said about straw man, I mean, I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. You know, maybe are we going to go through these line by line? I mean, we can.
Well, I think that's what we should do right now is start working our way through it and going through. I think I'll start it out by saying that I think one of the things we need to have at the preface to the design guidelines is what the intent of them are and how they can be utilized.
What do you mean by that second thing?
Well, I think, you know, just as an example, going down to permeable pavement, or no, let's go down to one of my biggest bugaboos. So it's harvesting.
What was that?
Rain barrels.
Oh, rain barrels. Yeah, yeah.
The rainwater harvesting aspect. So we have minimum size rain barrel or cistern shall be 50 or 55 gallon drum. And, you know, 50 gallons equals an 80 square foot of impervious with a 1-inch rainfall. And, you know, that as a single unit should not count towards one of the three, in my belief, for getting a 10% increase of impervious coverage. You know, that there's got to be.
Because it's too small to have any effect.
Right, correct. You know, we're giving too large of a benefit for too small of an impact.
I mean, you can require more than one barrel, or, you know, if you're going to do a cistern, it has to be of a different size. But this is kind of like something that's easy to be implemented by a homeowner. It's, you know, sometimes, you know, for some homeowners, it's, you know, it's good for their cost effective item, you know, so, and we see this everywhere that it's like, it's encouraged to use this type of rain collection system. It's even just a little bit, it stops all of that rain going straight into flooding a road or going back into the canal, which is just kind of and I know it's just 50 to 55 gallons, but, you know, maybe if we require a little bit more than that, you know, it can provide a little bit more of a system.
So one question there would be, you know, Tom, I was thinking about this last night as it was pouring. You know, how often, Tom's figures and the mitigation planning meeting this morning, Ted Becker mentioned maybe we should be looking at Tidewater, Virginia. I actually spent some time in the intervening hour looking at some of the stuff that they're doing relative to these BMPs. And, you know, they made a similar calculation of 300 square feet would, for a 1-inch storm would yield, you would require a 120-gallon rain barrel. So, you know, I don't know which of the specific numbers really matters there, but the question to me is, how often do you get a 1-inch storm? You know, maybe Brent can answer that question. Obviously, we had something pushing some water yesterday.
But also recognizing, I think, and again, we're talking, it's one item. Again, we're requiring 3. So it's one item that I think could be, you know, somewhat beneficial. But if we get like, you know, a 1/2-inch storm, or even if we get that massive storm, it's still offsetting some of that water that's trying to go somewhere else. And I have promoted Brent so he can help answer some questions.
We just, for the record, yesterday, I guess call it 24 hours from like 6 a.m. to 6 a.m. if you want to call that a day. We got like 2.5 inches of rain.
There you go.
Yeah, and I do know there are some of excuse me, some of the examples that I was pulling information, and you can actually have one rain barrel go into another rain barrel. So you actually so you have that overflow. So you could actually just have one right in the downspout, and then that connects to an overflow, and that's actually like a good best management practice to have that extra overflow for some. And that actually shows up in, because some of the information I was looking at is coming actually from the state. They put together, Denver put together a good handout for homeowners, and it was kind of like explaining the benefits of, you know, rain barrels and planters and, you know, bioswales and other things. So people have a good understanding of what they are. So I think we can also reference that, but I think you can also, you know, have them in tandem, like, okay, I have one then connected to another. So you could end up with 4, which would be helpful in a very large rainfall.
So Tom, I think
in answer to Sumner's question, or, you know, it was an explanation, using the NOAA Atlas 14 data, the 1-year threshold for 1 day for us is 2.81 inches. So, you know, a fall is extremely common. I mean, as we all know, I mean, getting 1 inch of rain is not much. I was only using that as an example of how little it takes to fill a 50-gallon cistern. And, you know, going back to the ordinance that we've drafted, what we state in 3B is lot coverage may be increased up to 10% as long as 3 items from at least 2 categories are met. And I think they need to be somewhat significant or definable, like permeable pavement. We need to have a minimum amount of permeable pavement, and we need to have a minimum rain harvesting or rain disconnect if we're going to give a 10% increase in impervious coverage.
is there a way, I mean, the fundamental challenge that I see with all this is that this lovely list of BMPs is a sort of a qualitative list, you know, with good intentions. But when we're, as Tom is suggesting, giving away some amount of impervious surface, we kind of need it to be quantified more effectively. How might we do that? How might we, is there a way that we could create units of, for lack of a better term, effectiveness for each of these things? You know, how much, you know, retained rain, how much water could we expect to be able to hold back using rainwater harvesting or a rooftop disconnect or whatever? I mean, my bugaboo is infiltration. I think I've made that pretty clear. Some parts of the city infiltration may work, but in other places, I don't know if
Again,
we're gonna.
that's why we're going to have this reviewed by the city engineer. So they're going to review it when things come through. It's going to be reviewed to make sure, okay, does infiltration make sense for that site? Because it may not, and I don't think the intent is to get all of the rainwater, because that's very difficult to do. But I think what we're trying to do is, how do we offset some of what the impervious surfaces that we have? Because again, right now, as is, you're doing 60 to 65% impervious surface. So what we're trying to do is, one, we're going to raise that house 3 feet plus freeboard, so another 18 inches. Then we're going to try and okay, your lot, your footprint's going to get a little bit smaller. If you want to go a little bit bigger, you're going to need to offset with some best management practices. And we're encouraging multiple things. That's why we said you can't do oh, I'm going to do 3 rain barrels. So what we can put in is okay, minimum you have to have at least 2 rain barrels, or a cistern of this size. You can do that. But then it's we need to make sure that what we're doing is slightly offsetting that So if you want that 10%, you need to be showing how that 10% is being caught in the BMPs. We can add that you need to
If you said that 10% has to be caught and retained on the property, you can probably, there's probably some engineering way to do that, but it's not going to be, it's going to be a huge cistern. It's going to be pervious driveways. It's not going to be anything small as rain barrels and flower boxes.
Again, it's going to be a combination of all of those things.
Well,
rain barrels is just one option. You've got rain gardens. You've got a green roof, which could actually take care of the entire thing. You've got
a rain barrel is a 0 contribution to that retention in any storm that like Tom's talking about, 2 inches. It's a 0.
Let me throw out there a little background on the thought process of rain barrels. So the magic bullet of the 1 inch basically developed from 90% of the storms are going to get at least 1 inch. So the first inch is going to wash off on the roadway all the oil and grit and everything that's been laid down over time since the last rainfall event. On the roof, it's going to be, the bird, whatever air has been brought in, whatever salt air has been deposited there. That first inch is going to flush it. So the idea is that that rain barrel captures that and allows it to settle out, and then you use it for watering plants or whatever. It's kind of the same idea as some of the bioretention is they address the first inch. And it's more a nutrient reduction tool than it is just making it a pervious area and reducing the runoff.
It's more for nutrient than it is for the volumetric benefits of runoff.
Correct. Not to say that they don't have value, not to say that their worth isn't real. Like Joe said, he's got 3 of them in tandem. I know people that use them fantastically. I know people that have disconnected them. That's kind of becomes the bugaboo is they use these things, quote unquote, to get additional area, and then the practice is never actually maintained. That's up to you guys to decide. I'm just letting you know what I've seen in the past. I've worked around this realm for almost 10 years. And even before that, down in Ocean City and Worcester County that had a lot of these things in place. The rain barrels work really well for those that love them.
But they take personal management by the homeowner over an extended period of time.
Right. And these are going to be the homeowners that are going to decide what they want to do. So, they need to recognize what's going to work for them, what options do they want, because the management is going to end up with them.
So I think
So-
two things we need to consider here is, you know, we're for a 5,000 square foot lot, we're allowing for a 10% increase in pervious, which is equivalent to 500 square feet of pervious coverage. And I think the cumulative result of anything that we're doing or the requirements of the design standards has to be equivalent to what we would be perking for a 5,000 or 500 square foot of impervious coverage. And I agree with Brett's comment on, you know, the basis for stormwater runoff. The first 1 inch is flushing, but you have to realize that, you know, a 2,000 square foot roof, that would be equivalent to about 1,200 gallons of. So, you know, you'd need a significant cistern. I mean, I have a 1,000-gallon cistern buried in my lot to take the roof runoff. Now, I'm all for rain barrels because they do multiple things. I mean, they reduce the amount of treated water we're using from the from the water side. So it's a benefit from that. I mean, it's a feel-good thing, but they need to be of some significant size if we're going to allow them to be used to offset 500 square foot of impervious coverage.
Again, they're not going to take over the 500 square foot. They're going to be one component. They may take up a couple, you know, 100, but I think what we can do is say, okay, if you want to use rain barrels, you need to have a minimum of 2 or a minimum of 3.
Well, no,
Because again, you're looking at other options that are going to be required.
If I go back to the way we got onto this was someone was asking what I thought needed to be in the preamble or preface to this design document. And I think what needs to be in the design standard is, in order to qualify for a 10% increase in pervious coverage, you need to offset the equivalent amount by a combination of 3 of the measures that you have there. I don't want to be prescriptive because it may be 0 or 1 rain barrel and you're doing the rest of it by using permeable pavement or infiltration or whatever. But it's got to be a combination of the 2, of the combination of the 3.
Tom, this is why I do terrible on these calls, and I apologize for this. I may have to start doing more writing in between, but this is what I was trying to get at with the difference between qualitative descriptions like these, some sort of a quantification. What you were just talking about, it seems to me, is if you're going to get 10% additional impervious, you need to be able to generate through whatever combination of these BMPs a reduction of X number of gallons of storage on site, or whatever I don't know what the unit should be, what the time, you know, how it would work, but somehow we should be able to specify so that the flexibility is still to the homeowner or whoever's rebuilding.
So really quick, Tom kind of said it. It's like, and I don't think it goes in the design guidelines. I think it actually goes into the ordinance, is that the offset the BMPs shall offset the 10% increase, and they have to prove that. And it's on them to prove it. You know, 3 rain barrels, a rain garden, this or that, all end up equaling it. And then again, it's getting reviewed by an engineer who's going to go, okay, I got my 10%, but I put down, you know, 500 square feet of pervious pavement, plus a couple of rain barrels, plus, you know, a couple of planter boxes, that then equals that 10% offset.
And Janelle, that's great, as long as that is actually stipulated in here.
Yeah, no, I just kind of added it to the code.
Okay,
So one of the things that Brent mentioned earlier that I thought was super important was, you know, in the redevelopment of a property, you know, whatever combination gets worked out according to what you just said, Janelle, and I think that's exactly the way it should be. It may initially be set up that way, but as we know, properties turn over through time. How, you know, what happens down the line? The 10% additional impervious cover is there, but maybe people decide, I don't really want to look at these rain barrels. You know, how does that all work out?
Again, you know, if they end up coming through for a permit, we can catch and make sure when we go out and do the inspection that it's still there, it's still working. You know, if somebody starts complaining, it's like, hey, because, you know, if one neighbor's got to do it and another neighbor's got to do it, they might start like, hey, they disconnected their rain barrels. They'll give us a call. We can go out and like, yeah, you need to reconnect. Or it's like, hey, you took up your rain garden. You need to make sure that you know. So is it perfect? Nothing's perfect. But I think this gives us a good way to, you know, start getting those items and the thoughts behind it and the public to understand they need to take a little bit of responsibility. And I think it's an education issue. It's a responsibility issue that if you're going to live here and you want to enjoy it, you have to recognize that sea level rise is coming. You have a responsibility to take care of your own property and be part of the solution and how we're addressing it, because we're a community that if we're going to survive and thrive, we have to be able to do it together. And I think it's still, we're taking these baby steps. Again, this is a piece of an overall puzzle that as we continue to redevelop, you know, they might be on a homeowner's, you know, personal homeowner, it might be something small, but if we get a redevelopment of something larger, we'll catch that. So as we continue to implement all of our code changes and everything that all the subcommittees are working on, we're getting to the bigger picture of a more holistic approach to addressing the issues that are coming from resiliency for the city.
So Danielle Swallow made a comment which I think, and I'm not sure how to deal with this, is, you know, the state's climate assessment says that we'll experience an increase in intensity of rainfall over time. I mean, here we're looking into the future.
It's happening now. Just
You're saying
Again,
relative to historic data that we may base stormwater decisions on? What do you mean by that?
well, so I use the term that it rains differently now. We're getting more intense rains less frequently. So instead of having 100 rain days with 1 inch of rain and having 100-inch total, we're getting 50 rain days with 2 inches, but we're still getting 100 total. So we're getting to the total amount at the end of the day, but you're getting a lot more intense rain events. Like yesterday, we got 2.5 inches of rain. We were supposed to get, you know, 3/4.
Right.
There were a couple of times where we got a 1/4 inch of rain in 10 minutes, which is a really intense rain.
so
I think
Raining differently. And I'm completely agreeing with Danielle that I believe it's still going to continue to change in the future, but it's already here.
so. I think everyone knows. You know, I mean, trying to set up for the November workshop, and one of the people I've been talking with is Gina Tan from DENREC, who is responsible for precipitation forecasting. And, you know, she confirmed the other day to me that the NOAA 14 Atlas has not been updated in the last 15 years. So the precipitation data I had sent around to everyone that had indicated that, you know, we've had almost 4 100-year events in the last 10 years. None of that data is actually in the precipitation forecasting that is being used for stormwater management design. She also did say that there is legislation in Congress right now to update NOAA 14. However, and she's going to go back and check to see where that's currently at and what the alternatives would be if that's not going to be done timely. You know, could we use a state regulation? Should we default to a 500-year design instead of the 100 because of the lack of timeliness of that? So Gina has agreed that she would be more than glad to prepare a presentation for the November workshop. But, you know, I mean, you all know, I mean, you've heard me on this many times. My big bugaboo is that the design for the 110, 25, 100-year storms are grossly out of date based upon what we've seen in the last 10 years.
Right, but right now we're focusing on sea level rise, and I know floodplain subcommittee is getting back together to take a bigger picture to what that's doing. And what I think we need to recognize is right now we don't have any of this in the code. None of this is required. And we even, as we discussed last time, that it was like, well, as new techniques come available, you know, new creative, you know, other bioswale, bioretention, other resiliency items come together, we can add those to the code. We actually have that, let me get down to it, because I think we left it as other scientifically proven BMPs to address the issues that we have. Because right now we don't have anything. And this is our attempt to get something going. We'll understand that things are going to change, so we have the ability to provide that flexibility. And as Danielle said, this provides some flexibility, and while infiltration might not work in some places, it may work on larger developments that are going to be impacted, because again, this is, if you're in the floodplain, this section of code will apply to you.
And Janelle, I agree with you. The code section we're working on is strictly on sea level rise.
Right.
However, what I wanted to bring everyone up to speed on was, you know, part of our task is also for this November workshop. And when I went to Mike Powell at DENREC and asked for a presentation on sea level rise, he had pushed back, I mean, in a very nice way, saying you cannot consider sea level rise without also and the impact of precipitation.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're looking at all of these bioretention items, because we recognize, okay, if just because we build the house 4 feet above what it currently is, we still have other issues going on, which is why we added all of these into the sea level rise. And we also recognize that we've got other things going on, so we're trying to like bridge the gap a little bit for a number of different things.
I agree with that. I think that's what this whole section is, that or the design guidelines, it's really not pure sea level rise. It's addressing the precipitation issues. But having said that, we also do need to understand that our requirements for stormwater management through Sussex County Conservation District are based on historic data that is current.
So just real quick, I'll say something.
Sure.
My understanding is that Maryland is looking at a new stormwater code. They went down this path of treating the first inch and all the BMPs and all these little rain gardens and bioretention areas and everything. And you end up with these, you know, I use Audi as a perfect example in North Salisbury, that it has like 4 little bioretention areas for the whole site. So you get 2.5 inches of rain, where's the overflow go? I hear your point. How things typically work is Maryland usually is on the forefront. Delaware follows suit shortly thereafter.
Yep.
So my understanding from, they're keeping it really close to their vest over there in Annapolis, but that they're working on a new stormwater code, and it's not going to look anything like what we currently have. And I imagine that shortly thereafter, Delaware will follow suit.
Right, but I think for right now, in the interim, I think we need to do something.
Yes,
Because
I'm
it's gonna
saying,
take some
so
time.
what
for
we
things-
have now are the tools from Sussex Conservation District of the approved stormwater that they have,
Yes,
instead of us trying to recreate something that's going to take Maryland 3 years with intensities and all that. You can use the Sussex Conservation and either address it completely as it is as the first inch, or go above and beyond. So, and what I mean by above and beyond is if you wanted to absolutely require pervious pavers for the driveway, period, no questions asked, that would be one technique that you guys could implement, and it wouldn't have to be questioned. Or it could be an option, and maybe instead of a 1-to-1 to get the extra 10%, maybe a 2-to-1 type thing. I know that's a crude calculation on the intensity, but it does get you down the road of what you're trying to address. Just offering up opinions.
No, and Brett, I think that's great. I think that's where we need to go right now is let's go through the items, if we can, on the design guideline and discuss what needs to be beefed up maybe in them, what definitions need to be added. And so we can move forward. So we talked about putting a preamble in saying that, the intent is that the offsets have to be equivalent to 10%.
yep, I'll take care of that. This
Okay.
preamble for the purpose is kind of big or broader, because we're just gonna refer back to the code section.
Okay, that's fine.
So this was just kind of a bigger thing. So buyer retention. We've
So
got
buyer-
rain
buyer-
gardens, tree box filters, streetscape bioretention, large bioretention, raised planter boxes. What we did was raised rain gardens and raised planter boxes are encouraged for single family lots. The other examples are encouraged for larger scaled projects, because based on what I've come across, that's really how they function. If you're going to do a planter box, and I actually wrote it in here, you've got to have a pervious surface underneath it, of course, and then it needs to be large enough and sized enough that to offset a percentage of the impervious surface proposed. So it's like, I can't just do like a 2x2 rain, planter box and go, oh, good, look, I'm here, but I'm getting 500 feet. So it's like, no, it's got to be a proportion of that 10% that you're looking for. So we're getting that offset.
And the other thing that I think those devices like planter boxes need to be is they need to be able to withstand floodwaters coming through the site, so they're not getting picked up and carried onto the neighbor's property and so on.
Well, they're
Maybe that's
typically
covered somewhere.
raised a couple of feet off the ground. They're not
Mhm.
typically on the ground. Based on the ones I was looking at, especially the examples from DENREC, they're raised up actually a couple of feet, and then you have the water going through it, all the nutrients kind of going through it, and then into the pervious surface. So it's kind of, cleaning everything and then going into the ground. So it's kind of holding it. So it's not like sitting on the ground.
Okay.
Many raised planter beds are built right on the ground though, and I think they're perfectly fine. But I think to Sumner's point, they either have to be protected from floodwaters or the other thing here is that I would suggest we change size large enough to like you have under the conservation landscaping, that it's got to be 1-for-1 for every square foot offset.
Okay.
Bob, do you have any comments on this one?
I'd support that. I guess I think that the only things that matter here are permeable pavement, bioswales, green roofs. I don't say cisterns, stuff that gets built in.
So let's move on to the second one then, permeable pavement. Two questions questions on this. One of the ones is that we don't talk at all, well, I think it needs to be defined as permeable pavement has to be an engineered solution. There's a lot that goes into it besides permeable pavement. I mean, the subbed has to be adequate to allow it to hold and allow for infiltration of anything that you're collecting. Otherwise, a permeable pavement is the same as a impervious pavement.
So yeah, I just added a line that says, it needs to be an engineered product. And again, this is all going to be approved by the engineer when it's coming through. Because there's a lot of them, they have, I mean, you just look online and they already have the engineering items already saying, okay, this is what you need to do. So it's like, you just provide those specs and we know that it's meeting the requirement.
Right, so this design guideline is what the public is going to see, and I want to make sure that it's clear to them.
Yep, I just said it shall be an engineered product.
So again, looking forward in time, given what Brent and Danielle have said about increasing storm intensities, one of the things that comes to mind in this one is conversations that the city council has had over pervious paving, and I mean big things like pervious street asphalt type installations. My sense is that over time they can get clogged, over decades or whatever time,
It's
over the life of the
maintenance
pavement. Do we have to be
responsibility.
worried about the reduced effectiveness of that pervious surface, whatever it is?
Yeah, it's all about maintaining. And again, this all comes back down to maintaining. And then there was a question, does stone and clamshell driveway count as permeable paving? Currently, they qualify as pervious surfaces in the city regulations. So yes, that actually does qualify as pervious. Again, it all depends on what your base is. If
Right.
you're putting
I
down,
think
like, depending on how compacted you get it, but currently the way the code reads is that stone and clamshell is pervious.
So,
Okay, other questions on pervious?
yes, I think to that point, I think we need to add in here a bullet that says gravel, clamshell, etc. needs to be engineered, has to be engineered. Because as you pointed out many, many times, if you put a clamshell drive down, after you've driven across it, it basically becomes packed limestone.
Okay, added.
Okay.
All right.
Brett, do you have anything that you would suggest about using gravel, other type of aggregates that should be considered here?
So you're going to have an evolving situation. Like you said about the clamshell, it's going to be pervious till it's not. At some point, it becomes compacted. But let's be honest, on the beach side, if you were to utilize it over there, at some point it's going to be underwater as well, which potentially has the uplift and kind of reinvigorates it a little bit and opens it back up. It kind of becomes a fit and feel issue at that point. And the best I can say is if you're not comfortable with that for the longevity of it actually turning into something else, then I would explicitly say it's not allowed. Pavers come in all sorts, sizes, and manners. There's the ones that have a little 1/8-inch lug, and that's the gap between that one and the next one. There's other ones that come in and they're the open center and you can have grass growing up through them, and the grass is going to suck up the water and they're only 50% impervious. There's
a multitude of different types and different kinds. And
you can
I know
set limits for the open area, the porosity, whatever you want. In order to get a truly gravel pervious, you would have to turn it, you know, and enforcing that on a homeowner, hey, it's year 7, you've got to turn your driveway, becomes a code enforcement nightmare. But also, in order to get the depth, to get the porosity in there to hold that first inch, you're going to have to put an 8-inch stone driveway in. You put a normal vehicle on an 8-inch stone driveway, you're not going to get back out of it. You know, it's just going to sink and flow and move, and you're going to end up with ruts and grooves that are compacted anyway. So
Yeah, I like your example of, I mean, because I've seen, we used to do a lot in Pennsylvania where you had gravel runners for the tread and then planted green grass median in the center.
yes,
I mean, that was a very common in, you know, where I came from up in Pennsylvania as a means of mitigating.
so it's become a very hot button, or I say vogue thing to do in Maryland for reduction. So if you were to have a 20-foot wide paved driveway, to do 2 concrete and 2 concrete, so you drive on the rails, so to speak, and you're opening up the rest of it.
Right.
So it lends itself to that
That's why
reduction.
I add the term engineered solution into all of these, because then we trust, you know, in the review process to catch up.
And again, all of these have to be reviewed by an engineer before they're getting built. So part of the review process is engineer reviewed.
Right. I just like kind of putting game rules up front.
Yeah.
So we don't have to be the bad guy.
I'm with Brent.
I can actually put that in the purpose, and I think we've already got that in multiple other places, because, you know, it's not like you're going to be able to just like, hey, I can just do whatever I want, because it's like, if it doesn't meet an engineer requirement, I mean, we're just going to kick it out immediately. So
Is an engineer involved on a regular basis on a rebuilding permit today? And is this going to activate a whole new level of employment for Brent and Charlie and everybody else?
Potentially, but these aren't large scale
Right.
things.
They're pretty quick.
They should be. Let's put it that way. There are some other engineers that may turn this into a whole 3-course meal, but you
and
should.
again, if we're getting an engineer to submit it in the first place, which we can require, and then, you know, Brent and Charlie and everybody's just kind of like, yep, that works. We've already got an engineer going, yep, we're meeting our requirement. It'll actually help with the time as well, and making sure that, you know, it's complying.
What I've seen done in the past is for, you build into the code or into a design guideline typicals. This way you don't have to have an engineer involved in every one of them. As Brett described, you know, concrete runners or gravel runners with a planted grass strip and the depth that the gravel has to be. You can just put typicals in there, just like we do for street design and sidewalk design. That's already built into the code, so that everyone does not have to reinvent the wheel.
Right. I think there's, you know, depending on the type of pavement, the paver you use, or if you're going with the stone and the clamshell, or you're doing, you know, the concrete, many different, you know, engineering specs that go into it. They're not all the same. So I think if we just leave it that you have to meet the standard design, the engineer, it has to be an engineered product or meet certain engineering requirements, that helps us, and also provides more flexibility than going, you must meet this. Because, you know, there's so many different types of things that are, we've got a lot of moving parts, and we don't want to be so, we want to provide that flexibility, so we get people to do this. You know, we want them to, you know, take advantage and, you know, get them on board. So if we allow that flexibility, going, okay, it just has to be an engineered product, you have to build it to the engineering standards, we're good with that. We're going to check it. You're going to provide information. We're going to check it. I think that helps out a lot.
Again, according to the ordinance-based requirement that it achieves a certain actual reduction Or
Yes,
retain-
you have, if you want to get to the
retaining-
60%, you've got to provide a 10% reduction because that's what you're offset.
So, and Janelle, I recognize we don't want to be prescriptive, but we also want to make it economically efficient. And I think using an alternative of engineering cut sheets from a engineered product, I mean, like a paver, or some of these things like with Brett was talking about with runners and grass, that's rather than having to have an engineer involved every time, if you just had typical cross sections for that, it would make it much more efficient for a homeowner.
I would agree with that. I think that's a good suggestion, Tom.
To streamline the process. I mean, Brett, what's your feelings on that?
Yeah, so occasionally I'll get in situations, like when we do school projects, I have to performance spec something. For you guys, we did it for Coleman Avenue. We performance spec'd the paver. We didn't select a specific type. We didn't select a specific manufacturer or anything like that. But the porosity needs to meet this, and it needs to, convey XYZ. As an engineer, that's easy to do.
Yeah, Brent, can you give me that information and then I can add it to the permeable pavement section?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, perfect.
Do you see the Q&A that's in there?
We just addressed that because Brent's going to get me something and I'm going to put in the design standards. So we'll just
Okay.
have a general, typical, it depends on, gives you some, it'll give flexibility, but we'll have like a typical standard of what it needs to be.
Okay.
And sometimes, we'll even go to the point of, like, in a spec, we'll call out 3 manufacturers or approved equal.
Yes, or the approved equal will be very helpful because, again, we want to allow that flexibility because we need
Right.
people to get on board with this and be willing to do this because.
Like when we're calling out piping, there's 3 manufacturers of pipe. We'll call out approved equal just to cover, but you're not going to end up with a 4th type. But as far as pavers, there are all sorts of manufacturers. The problem is that the accessibility to them. But if somebody has access to them up in Vermont and wants to bring them down, not going to turn them down. So.
Hey, I shipped a lot of my stuff in from Pennsylvania because I couldn't get it down here.
I see it a lot in Talbot County as well. There's stuff in Talbot County. You're like, that doesn't really. Well, I was the manager on the Cannery Stream restoration project in Cambridge. The first stream restoration, and the stones and boulders that they brought in were from York County, PA, because the porosity of them, they will actually grow shrubs out of the stones. The guy putting them in refused to tell me exactly where he got them from because it's such a well-kept secret because of the porosity of the big boulders. But we have Pennsylvania rock in Cambridge because of that fact that you just can't find anything around here, but they needed substantial size stuff.
Okay, so I think we have a solution for that. Are we good with permeable pavement?
I think with
Yes,
those.
no, maybe so.
With those clarifications, I think so.
Okay, so next is what is typically a standard now is the roof disconnect with a rain barrel cistern. Do we want to leave that one in there? Do we want to make that one go away? Because then we also have, his roof diffs, we want to make sure they're doing a roof disconnect, and I think Brent has said that's just a standard at this point.
It seems like that's.
I would think that rain barrels can't really do it.
Okay,
even
again,
for your
this
10%.
is
I
the
would
roof
say
disconnect in
rain
connection with that.
Well, does the building
Different
code right now
section.
require rooftop disconnect?
So in
Brian?
order to meet that, you need to be 60 feet away from wherever the water goes over grassland flow. So like on a single family home, you're not going to get a 60-foot backyard typically within Lewis to either the property line or wetland line or wherever you're going with the drainage. So it's in there, because of a redevelopment on, you know, maybe a
large
commercial property or something.
Okay.
You know, if the school or hospital does something, or university, you can definitely get that 60 feet, but you're not going to find that on most single family homes or
Right.
even
The
duplexes.
the code currently requires is that you disconnect from the sewer system.
Mhm.
Some people are confusing with the term rooftop disconnect. So there was a major program 10, 15 years ago, and then redone about 7 years ago to make sure that none of the drains, the surface water was going into the sanitary sewer system.
And that's still in the code, I presume.
That's a separate item in the code. And I think Brett's point of the fact that we really can't, because of our small lot size necessarily, if anyone.
So we'll just take that one out, not a
No,
problem.
wait,
So-
I got the
I would
impression
say-
from what Brent said that there was value in leaving it in, just.
Yes,
because
I
of the
think
big-
for some properties, I mean, if you're not in a small area, it
If you can meet it, great.
yeah.
Okay, so next one is, again, we've spent a lot of time on this one already, is the rainwater harvesting, which is our rain barrels or cisterns. And I think, you know, they still provide some type of relief. Again, if you're gonna do the 10%, you know, maybe this gets you to 1%, so, and then you do something else. But right now,
That's
that,
where I offered up that performance spec that if you had, you know, you get so much percentage for so many gallons.
right, and right now I just added that you have to have a minimum of 2, because from everything I heard, and yes, a cistern does mean underground storage, that, you know, the 2 rain barrels is at least 110 gallons, which is, you know, better than the 1, because I think from what I've heard, is 1 doesn't really do anything, but at least 2 gets you a little bit something else. And again, remember, we're taking some baby steps to just give an option. And some people are really going to like this option.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I like the idea of just saying 2. I think it's got to be, once again, tied to performance, just like we're saying that we're allowing, you know, 1-for-1 offsets of square footage of rain gardens or such. Here, it's got to be, you get 80 square feet for every 50 gallons rain barrel or cistern.
Yeah, I'm more comfortable with that. I mean, I'm imagining, you know, like where I live over here in the R2, the lots are pretty big. If I can just put a couple of rain barrels on, and that's all I need to do, along with other things. I mean, if you really want numbers, I think you need to come up with that ratio, like I think what I heard Brent saying, what Tom's saying.
Okay,
I'd
yeah, we
rather
can
see
add
something-
the 1-to-1 offset, or, you know, just an offset that they have to provide. So we can take care of that. Conservation land, any other questions about that one? Because I think we have had a lot of discussion on that one.
There was a question in the chat from Barbara Curtis about the cistern.
Yeah, it is underground storage.
Okay.
Typically, a cistern is underground.
I'll go ahead and address a couple of those questions. So the terms that we're using, like the rooftop disconnect and cistern, are all out of the Sussex County Conservation District's stormwater manual. So while the Lewis Building Code talks about rooftop or downspout disconnects and rooftop disconnects, the rooftop disconnect is a practice that SCD approves, and that's how it's listed in there. So while it sounds like, you know, it's kind of like bulkheads. You have a bulkhead over a doorway, you have a bulkhead on the water. It just doubles up on the term, but we're using the actual engineering term. So if you want engineers to kind of look at, we're little funny people sometimes when it comes to terminologies, then we're speaking the actual terms from SCD. So.
The engineers speak like that.
Yes.
All right,
got it.
are we good with rainwater harvesting? Based on those comments and changes.
Yes.
Okay, conservation landscaping, minimum area shall be 1-to-1 for every square foot planted up to 10%.
So
Well, I mean, I don't know if we need to up to 10% because we
is
have to do other things.
conservation landscaping defined in?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I've got to go back and look at that. I did not realize that that was actually
So,
in there.
so
So I'm going to
Grant,
ask a question before we get too far down the road. Do you guys have a lawn maintenance requirement that there is a height?
Yeah, we have a grass height requirement, and I think we were already discussing that we were gonna have to exempt these.
Okay, just
Yeah, because we know there's a
this
conflict in
causes
the code
issues
because,
a lot more than you would believe
Mhm.
because they're pollinator fields, they're little areas, and they look. There are times, I mean, like this time of year, they look unkempt. They might have some color to them. In 2 weeks, they're going to be gorgeous, and then over the winter, they just look like a bunch of weeds. But they serve the purpose.
right, and I think what we can also is, you know, they're not really grasses. They're typically
Right.
some type of plant, and we have a grass height, so I think we can
Okay.
work with that.
Most of the guys that I run into that are out there on code enforcement couldn't tell you the difference between a grass and a weed and a real plant that is for conservation planning.
And again, I think a lot of this, if it gets approved, there'll be a lot of, you know, education with the public and for staff as we start implementing this, if approved.
so along those lines, I've been thinking about the engineer speak thing that Brent helped us with a minute ago. And I'm just wondering if it's worth being explicit in here, somewhere near the top of this list, that these terms that are used here all have, you know, they all mean something in Sussex County Stormwater Code. And they, you know, that should be the first place to refer to these terms, or whatever the right reference is. But it just seems like we shouldn't leave it, like if I'm a homeowner and I'm looking through all this, I may not necessarily think, oh yeah, I'll probably be able to find this in the Stormwater Code for Sussex County. Do we need to
Well,
make that explicit
yeah.
reference?
Summer, I think it's a good point. First of all, the standard nomenclature is anytime it's a defined term, it should be capitalized. So.
Again, this is just a rough draft. And
No,
I
no,
think,
as you know, I wasn't as a criticism. I'm saying
no,
that now to Sumner's point is, you know, conservation landscaping, rooftop disconnect, those terms that we're using in here should wind up being capitalized. And I think to Sumner's point, we should add a reference saying defined terms are from Sussex County Conservation District.
so I'm actually going to change the purpose to the background and include that, the intent, and then the fact that, as you know, as the terms defined by SED, and that these items are going to require engineer specifications.
Okay.
So I think we've kind of handled that. Okay. Still on conservation landscaping. Any other questions, concerns, ideas? Okay, bioswale or vegetated swale. Again, it's an option. I don't think we're gonna see a lot of this because it's not intended for very flat slopes, which is kind of like, we have a lot, we're not very hilly. But I think, you know, in other parts of the city, because again, I think we all think of like the beach area, but there is a good chunk of the city that is
Pilot
also
Town Road.
allowed by this.
Are these meant?
Pilot Town Road, there's a little
Yeah, there is.
wait.
Are these meant to slow water down and allow for infiltration? I mean, I realize they're also for nutrient removal and all that, but I mean, are they primarily meant to direct water that will go overland rather than infiltrate?
More or less.
They're
Well,
meant to be more overland flow rather than
Yeah, it's about the quality. The
Okay.
majority of it's the quality, but you get the quantity effect of what's going
Right,
in
because
there.
they're really
That's
designed to be, I'm sorry, Brent.
Okay.
They're really designed to be along the roads, so they're catching all of that to clean it and then to kind of get it through. So again, I think for our larger redevelopment areas, because we do have potential for some, or for other places, I think it could be a benefit, but I don't see this happening on an individual residential lot.
Well, I mean, the other thing is where it ends. Um, if you have a residential lot, it ends at your property, it might end all up in your neighbor's property.
Right.
Or, conveniently at the driveway where it all runs out into the street.
So we do have a code requirement that says that you can't discharge water onto your neighbor's property in excess of what's currently existing.
How about, or the street?
Well, again, these are intended to be along the street to kind of collect. And again, they're not intended for single family lots. They're more intended for our larger developments, which will have more space for these types of items.
So where these are going to really take hold would be new development along the street, and the function of them is to the public safety, get the water off the street, get it somewhere, and then you're getting the water quality out of it at that point, instead of just a ditch holding it for some point where whatever can happen to it and it just stands there for a little bit. But what also could happen is I can foresee XYZ home builders coming in and doing a 25 lot subdivision, and down each lot line doing something like this. So the houses are built up, they go to the lot line, this is shared down the lot line, and it overflows into the roadside ditch, or at the rear of the property where there's a stormwater easement back there and a collection system, maybe just a ditch, but it overflows to that. That's where I can see these things actually functioning.
Okay, so Brent,
But it's not really going to be a redevelop. You're not going to redevelop a house and put these in.
Right, but we could have some commercial redevelopment where this could,
right,
because we do have commercial areas in this area that could be impacted. So I think it's still an option that should be in there.
It's an option, and you never know what things are going to look like in the future. I mean, we never thought that we would be building on piles in Delaware, but here we are. You never thought you'd have walkout basements in Delaware with groundwater, but that's where we're at now.
Along the lines of the long grass question that Brent asked earlier, are these vegetated swales, the bioswales, are they typically, do they function as well with grass versus other kinds of plantings?
So typically, so I'm doing a design on a couple right now, one in Cambridge, one in Talbot County, and we're just doing, I forget what it's called. It's just a different type of fescue along the bottom, and then planting the sides in bluegrass and clover. So the sides can be mowed every week and maintained at a normal height. The center line of them, the one we're doing in Cambridge, is a 5-foot bottom. It'll be mowed twice a year.
Right. So now we're into a whole management question, which is sort of like something that's being brought up in the wetland buffer.
So that's the reason why I brought up a new development, so that homeowner, when people are coming in, or the home builder and developer, can actually explain that becomes part of the covenants, that becomes part of the education to the new homeowner, versus somebody doing a redevelopment and just having a one-off on the side of the property. If you do it throughout the whole neighborhood and you have a management system for the whole thing, which goes back to the wetlands management, the buffer management, and the understory management with the wetlands and everything, this can be built and baked into that. So it becomes an easier pill to swallow and understand.
So,
and again,
one of the things that comes to mind is needing, there have been a number of times in this conversation where we've made a distinction between things that sort of make sense or apply to my little 5,000 square foot redevelopment project versus a whole pile of houses on a bigger lot. Do we need to somehow classify these in here? Is it
So
going to be understood?
I would think you do. I'm
like this one we're
answering
talking
that,
about,
yes.
this one actually says not intended for single family lots. It's
Right.
intended for larger residential developments and commercial development. So, and you'll see that throughout that we recognize like, hey, this one not meant for individual houses.
And that goes along with the Sussex, the SED code. You know, you're not going to.
Yeah, if an engineer tries to come in with this one and like, yeah, we're gonna do this, I'm like, we're gonna know that, like, come back with one of the other items, you know? It's like, you know, we're not gonna let like somebody like do that. So we've got that added in. So any questions about that before we move on to infiltration?
Nope.
And again, infiltration also says this is intended for the use for larger scale developments. Because again, doing infiltration on a 5,000 square foot lot or smaller, you really don't have a lot of room. It's not as functional, but you know, we've got some larger lots throughout the city that could be impacted. We've got other areas that this
Well,
could be.
when it says poorly drained soils, I mean, let's say, is that, what's that mean? Water tables down 10 feet, 5 feet, 2 feet?
That could also be a composition of the soil.
I understand that, but
That's back to the bioswales and the vegetated swales. You know, that's, you know, again, we're looking at, you know, again,
Yeah.
some of these items aren't going to work for every property.
So under the Sussex Conservation Code, you can't do these in D-type soils. There might be a couple places around town that are D-type. And if an engineer is looking at this, he knows exactly what the terminology is. Everything on the beach side is A-type soils because it's beach sand. Whenever we've done a infiltration test out there, we got 120 inches an hour.
Wow.
So, I mean, you could just back up with a dump truck and it's going to be gone in 30 seconds.
Subject to the depth of the water table.
Right, correct.
So that brings me to the question, the conservation district, how does it address sea level rise? How does it address the you know, sort of potential decrease in depth to water through time?
So right now, they haven't been tasked with that, so they're not really addressing it.
No, it's not, and it would have to be something that's going to be coming down from DENREC to Sussex County Conservation District, and DENREC is wrestling right now with what to do with it.
Okay,
Right.
so I just want to put my plug in that given that this is a sea level rise committee discussion, we need to be making sure that we're keeping this in mind and we don't just simply let it fall. Because
Right.
Again, that's why we're kind of doing some of these things as well, because we recognize it's bigger than just one item.
So Jessica's looking at, you know, projects in Bethel,
right.
and Laurel and Delmar and Georgetown and all over the place. So it really hasn't been baked into it yet. So she's addressing what she can address. You know, 15 years ago, the groundwater table in Wycomico County was at a 100-year low. 2 years ago, it was a 100-year high. So it does fluctuate. I know the beach is a completely different animal. It's pushing up now, and that's a product of all the rain in 2018 that came down, the aquifers being recharged, coming through, everything. Who knows what it's going to look like in 10 years, but the problem is that addressing what's under the ground with sea level rise is you can only, we've had the conversation, you only focus on today, that point in time. And I don't know how to do it differently. The state doesn't know how to do it differently. National scientists don't know how to do it differently. It is, and that's not an excuse. And that's not to say it can't be addressed. It just, I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole and then just go, crap, we can't do anything.
Right.
You know.
I
Some
guess
of
I'll
it,
just,
I think-
I'll just posit that there are other areas besides just the beach within the city.
Yeah.
And
Oh, no,
particularly in the area that's identified as land we would like to see annexed into the city, where we
Yes.
have low-lying areas highly hydrologically connected to the rising sea, where the groundwater will come up through time.
Yes.
So yeah, I
And
realize.
that is for the new
Nobody's got the answer.
development discussion.
What's that?
That's for
I
the new
think-
development discussion, because we haven't gotten there yet.
I
Right, I
think-
guess I'm
I
seeing
think-
this as the beginning, we're
Yeah.
laying the groundwork for that now.
Yeah, this all ties in. I actually could see some of this section, being part of redevelopment and new development. That would make sense to me. But again, we're gonna keep working on this one.
Yeah, just one-
Infiltration. Do we have any concerns
one-
about infiltration? Go ahead, Tom.
Just one last thought on what, Sumner and Brett were just talking about is, I agree with Brett 100%. The engineering community and science community does not know how to fully address sea level rise with especially semi-disconnected groundwater. I think where the forefront of the research is going right now is specifically like areas like Florida, where it's porous limestone, and there is modeling going on in Florida to understand how sea level rise impacts inland communities, because it's easier to model that than it is in our environment.
I actually disagree with that. I don't know how limestone would be an easier place to model than sand.
So
The
infiltration.
problem is in the Chesapeake, we get so many different
Types.
variables that everything's limestone, so they have one condition they can model.
Yeah, so absolutely right.
So
If we have pure,
easier is a qualifiable term.
Okay.
yeah, we have A, B, C, and D soils here, and we have clay, we have silt. I mean, on the beach it's sand, but that's not true on.
Everywhere. You can go one house and the next house can be completely different. So, and again, that's what we've discussed, is like, this is why we have all those options and the flexibility, because we know these aren't going to work for every house. So infiltration, we recognize infiltration is for a larger scale. Are we okay with that? Do we want to put in that qualification of like 1-to-1, for square footages? What are we thinking?
Well, I think it's got to be the same. It's got to be some sort of offset for unit infiltration to square footage. I don't know how you do that though, because infiltration is not I don't think, a fixed parameter.
Well, and of course, if we're getting into larger properties, what we do with infiltration, it does kind of matter where we're doing the infiltration and how connected it is to places like excellent recharge areas and our wellhead area, so on. I mean, I know that's a topic for a whole other committee at some point, but.
Actually, we're kind of doing that work for them.
Okay.
Because
Fine.
these items, what was introduced at council
A
at
lot
their
of
last
overlap.
meeting is pretty much what we're doing right now for excellent recharge areas for lot coverage. All right, so I put in an offset for square footage is required. Anything else we want to do for infiltration? Again, recognizing these are larger scale developments and probably make more sense for new development than redevelopment.
I have trouble with this concept that although the science can't pin this down with certainty that we would like to have, that if I can currently establish a 2-foot headroom for an infiltration project, but only 2 feet, and I can pass it today, given what we know about sea level rise, it just doesn't sit well with me that we would let something like that through, knowing that it's less likely that it will function at some foreseeable point in the future.
So
Again,
there is a term that's typically used, and I'll check, but I believe it's in the Conservation District guidelines that it's seasonal high water table.
So
So
you're picking the most conservative water
Right.
table situation.
right. So I mean, groundwater will fluctuate 18 inches within a year. So you're not testing it in August when it's at its lowest. You're basing it on the February, March wet season high groundwater table.
Right.
So
But
the
it-
seasonal
but-
high, you need the separation from that.
But again, you know, as time goes on, those extreme February situations will become a more regular situation with new higher water tables being in those extreme cases. Or do we
Understood.
not
And I
even
think,
agree that that will be the way to work?
again, right now, we're just trying to get something in
Yeah, yeah.
with the understanding that we understand things are going to change. And I think this is what it's doing. It's planning to the best ability we have right now for the future and giving a little extra. All right, green roof. Do we have any issues with a green roof?
Do we want to add any type of definition or explanation here? And Brett, I don't remember, is there anything in Susquehanna Conservation District on green roofs?
I can't remember the code perfectly right now. I believe it's allowable in there. It's just not many people do them.
Right.
The
it's-
only one that I can think of that may possibly even come close to this is cultured pearl. It's the only thing that I can imagine would even have a percentage of the roof address this. And even that, I'm not sure that they went down that path on that, for that purpose.
No,
I think it
that was
just
a long time.
happened to be
That was a long time ago.
right. It just happened to be a thing that they created. Whereas if you were to submit that now as a green roof, you would get maybe 5%.
No, I think a lot of other communities or regions are much further advanced on this.
So I'll tell you, my experience in the past has been, you throw something new at construction people around here, and they balk, and
Yeah.
the price goes up substantially, which makes it not reasonable to do. If you get in an urban environment and try to do a renovation of a building where somebody's already done 5 of them, they kind of get the idea. Case in point was LEED buildings when they first did it. There were 2 schools that they did over in Howard County. They bid one as straight up school. They bid one as LEED gold. The price went up 28%. It was the same exact plans. There was no difference in them, except for that name on it. The contractor kind of freaked out, thought it was something completely different, and put a 28% premium on it. So I'm not going to discount green roofs. Like Janelle said, it's going to have to be reviewed by the engineer anyway. If somebody wants to put a green roof in and deal with that and deal with the contractor that installed it and the maintenance of it, feel free.
Right, I mean, that's I guess
See
my
many
concern
people going down that path.
is how well they perform in the long term. That seems like a lot of maintenance.
It does to me. I would never want one, but that's
Well,
not to say somebody
People
else
who
would.
do.
I got to tell you, having lived in Europe and in Switzerland, almost every roof is a green roof. They are not that high of a maintenance. I mean, we're not talking about elaborate,
Right. Well, they also don't get the intense rainfalls that we do. That becomes the difference. That's kind of like the Danish lock system and all the moats and everything that were built. Their tidal range is 18 inches every day of the year.
Mm-hmm.
They've had one event in the last 60 years that was more than 1 foot outside their normal range. One event in the last 60 years. We've had one event in the last 60 days outside 1 foot normal.
Yeah.
And actually, I think that was yesterday.
Last weekend.
Having said that,
Yeah.
you know,
And the
they
full
also,
moon this weekend.
also get the snowfall over there that we don't get. So they're
Right. It's just a different environment. And I mean, I love the idea. And it's become a vogue thing to throw out there. And if somebody can come up with a plan and wants to do a neighborhood or wants to renovate something and put a green roof as a garden rooftop, you know, with patio area, feel free.
Are there parameters that would help that we would use to qualify these two words that would make you more comfortable?
So personally, as far as I understand it, if it's a green roof, it's pervious to the ground, because that rain that's falling straight down onto it never reaches the ground and it's hitting a green surface. So whatever is a green roof is considered pervious. It's the same as a yard.
I thought I've seen.
So that, just keep that in mind when you get to that 50%. You might want to qualify one, you know, ratio, whatever it is,
Right.
there.
I don't buy one-to-one.
Well,
I don't
and
buy
again,
one-to-one there.
again, they can
And
do a
that's
green
fine.
roof, but that's one of the 3 options they'd have to do.
Mhm.
So it's not going to count for all of it. Because you have
Well,
2 other items you have to do, and then you have to provide that offset of, do you want the 10%?
If somebody wants to get 10% by putting in a green roof,
Yeah, I mean, you talk
Yeah.
about it.
But again,
Well, you could say
roof.
green roof that absorbs 1 inch of rain, or whatever, some number.
I think this one, I'm actually comfortable with leaving it because
Okay.
green roof is going to be typically going to be in a commercial project, and it's going to have an engineering review both by the city and BPW, and I think we could handle it there.
Okay, so filtration.
What does
Again,
that mean?
recognizing that these are intended for larger scale residential developments and commercial and not intended for single family. Again, I think this is a good overflow that I would more see this in new development and not redevelopment, but there might be an area of the city that this could be a useful item.
Can we make that qualifier that you just shared explicit with this one, that you expect that this is more for larger scale developments?
Yeah, it's in there.
Yeah, it's the last line.
I think this
sorry, I didn't see
list
that.
ought to be sort of divided into might be useful residential, more probably, rather than each line having a note to it.
Yeah, I can group them.
That makes sense.
That's not a
Yeah.
problem.
That was
I mean,
that was
just-
why I suggested that earlier.
It's just a little bit of, it's confused our discussion. Let me suggest something else. Maybe we could give some credit, if you will, for no hydrocarbon-based cooling systems, cooling heating systems.
So like a geothermal system, like a ground source heat pump.
Something like that.
Do we really?
So you're talking about mitigation on a broader scale, which I think is wonderful. We haven't really been thinking about that, but yeah.
Do we really offset pervious, impervious with that?
No, but you're talking about best
Management
building
practices.
practices.
it's a sustainable
Right.
issue.
That actually would probably be a good idea for the overall resiliency, because I think that could
Right.
be,
I mean, if I had my own druthers, maybe it doesn't go here, but if I
No, I
had my
think-
druthers, you wouldn't allow any more oil tanks, and probably propane tanks in residential developments or redevelopments.
Well, that's what California's done. I mean, they've been more than propane, it's natural gas. They're making natural gas appliances illegal. I agree with you. I think that with a larger resiliency, it's more than geothermal. I think we need to go to LEED certification. We have never adopted the energy efficiency in the modern IRC code. I mean, there's so many things that we could add that would help on the mitigation side. But I would prefer that we not muddy the sea level rise portion that we're doing right now with that.
Okay. All
I
right.
think it's really important that we add something, or we look at that section of the code.
But
Yeah, I
Bob's
added it down to the
recommendation-
resiliency section, so we can come back to it when we get to the bigger resiliency section, because I think that's a really good place for that.
Right. I mean, Bob's question, and of course, nothing fits. I think one of the things that I find so difficult with this is that, a lot of these things touch a number of other aspects of the code. And throughout the day-to-day, I've kind of wanted to see a tag system, and maybe it's in place in the code. If I'm interested in sea level rise, how many different places in the code am I going to see a reference to sea level rise or something that helps to address sea level rise? If I'm interested in addressing stormwater, how many different places in the code am I going to have to go to find the treatment? There was something that Tom mentioned earlier where it's covered elsewhere, but it seems like we're kind of bumping up against that stuff here. I'm wondering just how particularly individual homeowners negotiate all the different intricacies of our code to make sure that they're right with all the aspects when they're sort of burrowing down one of these paths. And I realize it's not just our job.
Right. Again, that's why they call us and they call the building code, because they can look at it. You can do a search, but we are like the experts of the code, and we are here to provide that customer service for the public, because not everybody is like, plannery, zoning is not their area of expertise. So you call us and we help, guide everybody through it.
I happen to be one of those people that needs that guiding. I think that's what
Sumner,
I'm
I hear what you're saying, but I think Janelle's right. It's not just this aspect. I have never seen a code, whether we're talking about building codes or the American Society of Mechanical Engineers or civil engineers, you have to know the code to be able to figure out where all the different paragraphs are that impact you. Because if you try to combine them, there's too many different paths through them.
Right. That's kind of why I said tags. They allow a little more free form. It's sort of like the way HTML tags work. But I'll just leave it there.
Well, I think one of the problems that we have with our code, and it's on the back burner, but if you remember, we were going through the definition sections, is it's actually very difficult to search our code. I even have trouble, and I know something is in the code, but I'll be damned if I can figure out what the right keyword is to search on.
So later this afternoon, the action plan subcommittee is getting together to look at, what needs to be fixed and all of those items, because we all know we have a definition section, but then again, almost every section of the code has their own definitions. And, how do we get that consistency across the code? So if we're talking sea level rise, it's sea level rise throughout the code and not calling something else. So action plan meeting this afternoon, we're working on that. All right, so Brent needs to get me some data. Go ahead, Brent, I see you.
I have a question for you. So if we're talking about redevelopment in the floodplain as it addresses sea level rise, do you already have a revised parking calculation or forgivance or different than what's in the building code? Have you already revised the parking requirement?
Parking requirement is in the zoning code, and it is still 2 per dwelling unit.
Okay.
That's a
So-
bigger section that I would expect at some point we're going to look at the parking section of the code.
Okay. Just want to throw this out there for floodplain for impervious reduction using 1.34 or 1 and 3/4, 1.75, or for a commercial area using a 10 or 15% reduction in parking to get the building to do an offset. I'm not going to say in the industry, but on our end, you ride by a Walmart, we call it Black Friday parking.
Yeah, typically, I mean, and it's just historically how parking codes have been written.
I know.
And I know a lot of
new
places
thing
have been looking
is
at new
starting to
ideas.
minimize, because there's different forms of transportation. People are riding bikes, people are walking, people are taking the boat, however it is. Even, sometimes you see people taking an Uber to the store.
Right. So yeah, I've worked on codes that allow for, if you provide so many bicycle parking spaces, your overall number of car parking spaces changes and goes down.
Right. So just something to think of for Tom, Sumner, and Bob.
That's awesome. Thank you. I think that's a really, really good point.
Because one of the biggest problems is you have this just flat black surface that's a heat sink.
Yep.
That's causing as many problems as anything else.
Yes.
And the drive aisle. So you've got just massive areas. Or
How do you get
have an
more,
allowance for pervious pavers out there.
or just
How
to
about
get more
trees?
plantings? Yes, the plantings
Right.
into the parking lot, and do parking bumpers, because you'll have like a little rain garden. Your stormwater management is green and grass, and you've got, it's draining into that area. So I've seen a lot of different things. So next steps, I know we were looking to get this to the planning commission. Are you guys feeling like it's ready to go to planning commission for just a conversation and discussion? Brett needs to get me some items on typical items for engineering for pervious pavement.
Give me the list and I'll get it to you.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I haven't
I
been
guess
writing.
I'm feeling like I can't imagine going through this list as we've gone through it today. Again, I trust that you guys can work up the things that we've talked about. I think I'm not sure we've got all the details in place to take to city council, but I'm definitely comfortable bringing it to the planning commission to start a dialogue.
Okay. Tom?
I'd just like to see a draft of this before the meeting.
Absolutely.
No,
Tom, how are you feeling? It's your first one.
Feedback from the Brett.
I'd need to see a draft because I can see an all-night meeting trying to explain this at this point.
So
Well,
I think
again,
the
I think-
important part with this is in listening to Janelle sort of provide the background for where we are today and what we're trying to do today. We may need to have some simple one-pager that explains our process that precedes the way we're breaking this out. What our intended steps are. I think it would help.
I think
I agree with that.
PowerPoint presentation, just to kind of go like history, what we've kind of focused on, and then kind of where we're going, because I think that's really going to be helpful for the overall commission and the rest of the public.
Right.
And
These
again, this
documents
is
need
just-
context.
And again, I think this is just my understanding is to get it to the commission, get some feedback, maybe come back, work on it a little bit more, and then get it moving forward to a public meeting and such.
Yeah, remember that we're talking about bringing it to planning commission so we can have all 9 members of the commission
Right.
opine on it, not a public hearing.
Correct.
And one thing that I guess I would like to do, we touched on it a couple times today, I think to the extent that it also activates some kind of discussion on what the full commission would imagine we need to incorporate into the new development scheme as we go back and start to look at that. I'd like to be able to capture that, talk with them.
Yeah, and that was the intent of this is that before we tackled that last step, and I think Janelle made a statement earlier, I think a lot of the groundwork we've laid a lot of the groundwork for the new development. But before we take that next hurdle, we want to make sure we get feedback and we're not out in left field.
Right. Well, I think the other thing you would have to do in the PowerPoint presentation is say, there are these other pieces coming,
Oh, absolutely.
because, you know, the expectation of many would be that these are very small relative to sea level rise, a very big topic. So you'd have to be back and say, and this other piece will be coming, and this other piece will be coming.
Yep, again, it's just a piece of the puzzle that we are currently working on. All right, so I'm gonna get this revised, send it back out to you guys, and then let me know if you're comfortable one at a time via email. Bob, your email should be ready to go now, so I will get that to you.
Well, you have to tell me how to use it, because
Absolutely, we will get you set up.
So one question about the presentation to planning, you know, I know at least Tom and I, and maybe Brent and Janelle, I don't know about you yet, Bob. I've spent a lot of time looking at sea level rise estimates through time, you know, different treatments of it and so on. We've talked about some of it. Do we need to have some sort of presentation on what the state, for example, says in that technical report that we refer to? You know, here's the sort of the time frame, here's the magnitude of the problem, here's how that lays itself out over the city.
Again, I think we're definitely going to have that included, that what is the current, you know, intermediate line looks like and how far it's going out. And I think we can add some of the maps that I used earlier on, showing, you know, the 1 meter sea level rise, and we're in relation to the floodplain. I think those will all be very helpful.
Okay.
I think we can provide a link to the, you know, say, go here if you want to read the full report.
Well, I'd suggest that when we have that meeting, that we've got the ability to actually have a computer, you know, with maybe that website, whatever, so that people can see what it looks like.
Well, again, you're thinking
if you're doing a presentation to planning
meeting,
commission,
and this is just background to the commission to kind of make sure that we haven't gone into left or right field, and that we're still playing center field, for my baseball analogy, that, you know, we're still playing the infield. We haven't gotten to the outfield yet, so we're all still on the same page.
And recognize that the wetlands buffer ordinance work public meeting is going to go first.
Correct.
It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes in the era of Zoom. I think that's going to be the first major public hearing that we've done in the city using this platform.
Yes. So
Actually, I have a question about that.
Yes.
Having started my Zoom experiences on this committee, where I could see all of the panelists and all the attendees, now that I've been an attendee on a number of other city meetings, I have to register my extreme frustration with the fact that I have no idea if there are 2 people out there like me, or if there are 100 people out there like me. Is there a reason that we can't share what we all can see as to what the attendees are saying, you know, for all the other attendees?
That is actually a function of Zoom.
so I would say what you can do at the beginning of the meeting, say, you know, I'd like to invite all the panelists and the X number of attendees online with us listening in.
Right,
You
and
can
again,
maybe address it that way.
well, the
people come and
history
go
book,
throughout meetings, so it's
the
just,
History Book Festival somehow has their meetings on Zoom, and having attended a bunch of those, you can tell so many people are on, and here's the chat window.
so
And
it's also the way the meeting's set up. Like, this is a webinar, because this allows us, you know, to focus on the communication and allows the people to ask questions and answers. But there's typically how we set up our committee meetings and our subcommittee meetings as is a
well,
webinar.
can I suggest that you talk to the History Book Festival people,
So
because they can
so
do
it's a-
what Sumner is asking.
it's a classification that Zoom has for the way the whole thing operates. If you say it's a webinar, it turns off that sort of attendees seeing attendees function.
Right, for the attendees, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to second some of this concern, because when we hold public hearings, you can look around the room and see
Right.
who else is there. And I find it very frustrating attending meetings where I'm not a member of the body, and I have no idea who else is on that call.
We can look at it and see what we can do.
I mean, Janelle, were you on the Rascal meeting the other day, the coffee hour?
Yes.
I thought Danielle did a fabulous job of running all that. Now, maybe she may have been set up as a webinar as well, but I thought she made great use of the different pieces of the Zoom thing between the chat and the Q&A. And here's how you use Q&A, here's how you use chat, and so on.
Yeah, so when we do a public hearing, we do explain all of that
Okay.
with, when we get there. Because
All the
I have done
housekeeping.
that, and the mayor has done that, explaining, okay, for question and comments, you can do this, and you can always raise your hand, and we get to everybody. You know, we always,
It's just that only the panelists can see those questions coming in, and only the panelists can see who's on the call.
The only way to improve
I
that
check.
in this webinar thing is to let everybody know at the beginning of the meeting that if they want to put something in the chat, they need to make sure they select the all panelists and attendees choice as to who the chat message goes to.
and again, that is the default function of Zoom. So, and again, we do that when we get to a public hearing. That information is provided to the public when we get there.
All right.
Okay, so Brent's gonna give me something, I'm gonna give Brent something. I'm gonna get it back out to you guys. Do we wanna schedule a next meeting, or do we wanna just go to council, to the commission, and then schedule a meeting after commission?
We could put a placeholder in for, we're gonna have to get back together after the commission, so.
Right, but I wasn't sure if you wanted to do beforehand or when. So the commission meets October 21st. Do you wanna get together on the 28th?
28th is bad well, the night. You talking about during the day?
During the day, 11 o'clock,
Okay.
because we typically have been doing 11 o'clock
Okay.
on Wednesdays.
That's fine. Yeah.
So
I
anybody?
wouldn't be here.
No, okay, so Bob, it's not good for. Are you anytime that day, Bob, or just,
No, I'm out of town.
okay. The 29th, which is a Thursday?
I'm out of town.
Okay.
When
Are you out of
you
town that
back,
whole
Bob?
week?
Hmm?
Are you
Are
out
you
of town that whole week?
No, I'm out of, I'll be in Pittsburgh, 28th, 29th, 30th.
Okay, what does the 26th look like, which is a Monday?
That's fine for me.
I am not available on Monday.
Tuesday.
So maybe we push it on to the next week, the first week in November.
Okay. Which would be November 4th is our standard Wednesday.
Let's do that.
4th at 11?
As long as we're done by 1:30.
We typically are. We're getting close.
I
I
know.
think this is one of our longer ones.
I'm
Okay.
going for my certified climate change professionals certification.
Wonderful.
Right.
Good luck.
Brent, would you do me a favor and send me a link to what that certification is? I'm very curious what that is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So we'll get you something out soon, and then we'll get onto the commission agenda for the 21st, and then November 4th at 11.
Super.
All right.
Thank
Gonna be
you.
busy.
Thank you very much, Janelle.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Yes.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Everyone at 3:30, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah.